You're watching France 24 with me, Claire Rush. The headlines. Diego Maradona's funeral procession has arrived at a Buenos Aires cemetery. This football legend is set to be laid to rest in his native Argentina. Tearful tributes to the star pouring in from around the world the day after his death. The Ethiopian military will begin the final phase of its offensive in the embattled Tigray region, according to the country's prime minister. This after an ultimatum expired for Tigrayan forces to surrender. And a new video of police violence sparks further outrage in France. In it, officers can be seen beating up a black music producer in Paris. Authorities have ordered that the officers involved be suspended. Welcome back to the program. The casket carrying Diego Maradona has arrived at a cemetery on the outskirts of Buenos Aires, as the legendary football player is set to be laid to rest in his native Argentina. His funeral coming just hours after his casket lay in state at the Casa Rosada presidential palace, draped in an Argentinian flag and his famous number 10 jersey, as tens of thousands of Argentinians bid him a final, tearful farewell. Now for more on Maradona's burial, we cross live to our Buenos Aires correspondent Declan McGarvey. Now, Declan, Diego Maradona is set to be buried at a cemetery in Buenos Aires after an immense outpouring of public grief in his native Argentina. What's the latest?
Well, the latest is that the burial of Diego Maradona is now taking place at a cemetery about 40 kilometers west of the capital, Buenos Aires. It's attended only as a private ceremony by close family and friends. And before this happened, there was a long funeral cortege that took place on this 40-kilometer ride from the presidential palace to the cemetery. The hearse carrying the coffin of Diego Maradona was an open-top hearse, on which the coffin lay, covered with wreaths of flowers. The cortege itself, as it made its way to the cemetery, was applauded along its way and cheered along its way by thousands of Argentinians who had turned out again to catch a last glimpse of the coffin of Diego Maradona and to pay their last respects as well to someone who is a national hero. And we do know as well that as the burial takes place, a round of applause has just been heard from where the burial has taken place after the initial words by the priest who is overseeing the burial ceremony.
Now, describe some of the scenes you saw today. So much grief and raw emotion. Tell us what you saw.
It was a roller coaster of emotions, from outright expressive grief through to utter pain and also anger and chaotic scenes. As Diego Maradona's body lay in state within the presidential palace, we saw well-wishers and mourners filing by the coffin of Diego Maradona, throwing over football shirts, landing at the foot of the coffin, throwing over rosary beads, pumping their fists, banging their chests, crying openly, blowing kisses, throwing flowers over the coffin. This was an enormous expression of passion and emotion for Argentina's greatest son. It was marred slightly by rather chaotic and sometimes violent disturbances, both within the presidential palace and the area around it, as thousands upon thousands turned up to pay their final respects to Diego Maradona. There was at one point a big push by a number of mourners to get into the presidential palace, pushing down barriers and getting past police cordons. Tear gas was used by police within the palace itself to disperse those persons. And there was also more sporadic violence outside the presidential palace as well. Indeed, to the extent that the coffin in which Diego Maradona's body lay had to be removed temporarily from the hall at which it lay within the presidential palace for its own safekeeping. So this was a roller coaster day of a vast mix of up and down emotions of anger, pain, and grief.
Maradona will, of course, go down in history for his athletic skill, but he'll also be remembered for his political activism, won't he?
Yes, Diego Maradona was, well, arguably the world's greatest ever footballer. So, that's a massive point of national pride for Argentinians, no doubt about that. But he was also a very politicized figure, and he was very fond of showing this in a very physical sense as well. On his high up on his arm, he was very proud of sporting a very large tattoo of Che Guevara, the Argentine revolutionary. And Diego Maradona was very fond of saying, and he was on record of saying, that he felt that the two greatest Argentines in local history were Diego Maradona and Che Guevara. He was a big fan of the pink tide leftist governments that took power across South America in the early 2000s, and he was an ally and a friend of the Castros in Cuba, and indeed he did travel to Cuba on more than one occasion to seek drug and alcohol addiction treatment. He is known in Argentina as a man of the people, was as a very humble figure, someone who came from the slums of Buenos Aires, became a global superstar, the greatest footballer ever. But Argentinians will always say that he was someone who remembered where he was from and someone who spoke out in defense of Argentina's poorer and working classes.
Declan McGarvey reporting live for us from Argentina, giving us the latest, on Diego Maradona's burial, the superstar of football about to be laid to rest in his native Argentina. Moving on, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says he's ordered the army to move on Mekelle, the capital of the embattled Tigray region. Abiy says it's the final phase of the military operation, and it comes after his expired ultimatum for Tigray leaders to surrender. Abiy has warned the city's nearly 500,000 residents to stay inside. With all communications in the region cut, however, it remains difficult to verify claims about the fighting, which erupted 3 weeks ago between Ethiopian forces and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, which was the country's dominant political force until Abiy came to power. Our correspondent Maria Girth-Nicolescu in Addis Ababa has the latest.
According to diplomatic sources, federal forces were about 30 kilometers away from Tigray's regional capital Mekelle earlier on Thursday. We still received no information about the ongoing fighting in Mekelle. There's a telecommunications blackout throughout the region, which makes it very difficult to verify and obtain any information about the reality on the ground. Human rights organizations have urged all parties to the conflict to protect civilians. Mekelle is home to about 500,000 people, and the Prime Minister promised that all precautions will be taken to protect civilians. He urged residents in Mekelle to disarm and to stay at home. Both parties to the conflict are now accusing each other of planning to use civilians as human shields. The federal police also accused the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, of planning to massacre non-Tigrayans in Mekelle. So far, any attempts for mediation by the international community, and in particular by the African Union, have failed. Ethiopia's Prime Minister still refuses to negotiate with Tigrayan leaders whom he considers as criminal. This conflict has already internally displaced about 1 million people, and the UN has reiterated the necessity to allow humanitarian aid to access the region.
In France, another video of police brutality has sparked outrage. Shared on social media, a video of police officers beating up a black music producer can be seen in Paris. The Interior Ministry has ordered the officers involved to be suspended.
The video has shocked the nation. A black music producer known only as Michel returns to his production studio to pick up a forgotten face mask after seeing police on the street. The officers follow him inside and, according to Michel, started throwing racial slurs at him.
People were passing in the street and I was begging them for help. It all happened so quickly. Right then, I was questioning whether they were even real police officers.
The 3 officers then begin repeatedly punching him in the face until 9 others came to help him. The police then throw a tear gas grenade into the studio to smoke them out as neighbors film what happens. Michel was then arrested for violence against people with public authority, but after the video and photos of his injuries emerged, the charges were dropped and a counter-investigation against the officers was opened. Michel has now filed a complaint with the police watchdog.
I know they're going to do their job, and that's all I want, for them to do their job. I was assaulted because they had authority. I didn't do anything. I didn't punch anyone. I didn't do anything.
France's Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin has asked for the officers to be suspended. But the incident has further fueled fury against the police in France. It's the second known example of police brutality this week alone, after amateur videos showed police tripping up and manhandling migrants in Paris's Place de la République on Monday. The incidents happening against the backdrop of a controversial law that would forbid journalists, as well as members of the public, from taking pictures of the faces of law enforcement. Despite protests against it, the law has received initial approval by France's lower house of parliament. In the wake of recent events, Prime Minister Jean Castex has vowed to set up a commission to re-examine elements of the proposed law.
That's all from me for now. Up next, the debate with François Picard.